Welcome to this video on how to configure a Filr single appliance running against an OES environment. So during this process we'll run through it in real time, so there may be some long pauses, but we'll import the appliance into the virtualized environment. We will modify it, boot it up, configure it, get it up and running, patch it to the latest version, and then go into set up LDAP import from eDirectory for all the users. We'll set up the net folders so we can expose the OES files, and we'll also set up so that you can share files with internal or external users. So the first thing we need to do is go into your hypervisor environment. I'm running VMware Workstation here. You're most probably going to be running something different, but the process is going to be much the same as to what you have to do in your environment. So first of all, we need to import our Filr appliance image, which you can download from the Customer Center or from the evaluation area. Let's just go to File, Open. I don't want that one, that's the database appliance. Let's go for that one, which is the web appliance. I'll just open that up. I'll just call this Filr web, and yeah, let's just store it in that location for the moment, and I'll just import. So once this has imported, we can't just boot it up. There is a great temptation to just hit the power on button. There's some things we need to do to the image first. So first of all, we need to check that the memory processors are appropriate for our environment and modify those if need be. Check the VLAN is the right network that you're going to be using, and most important of all, we need to add 2 additional disks to the image. The first of these disks is going to be the data disk, where our database, our index, and indeed any personal storage that we've got is going to be stored, and the second disk is going to be mounted to /var, and where log files are going to be kept. So once this is finished importing, what we can do is just go and edit the virtual machine settings. So check the memory. By default it ships with 16 gig of memory, which should be suitable for most environments, and this should be good for maybe 100-200 users. Obviously if you've upper end there and you're going a bit slow, add a bit more resources towards the appliance to do that. Normally we'd recommend installing a large clustered environment which gives you high availability and easy horizontal scaling to bring that up if you've got more users or more utilization than you were anticipating. Let me just change my network. I'm going to be using VMnet 0. And finally we need to add those 2 additional disks. So the first disk is going to be the data disk, which is going to be used for storing our database on, the index on, and any personal storage that we've got. There are calculations if you look up in the design documents for how big this disk is. So in this case I'll just create a new disk. I'll make the size of this disk 200 gig. If you're not sure how big it should be, or not sure if you're going to be growing in the future, what you can do is make this quite large and then thin provision it so it'll grow to the appropriate size that you need. Also, there are ways of expanding the disk size in the future if you get it wrong. Let me just click next. Let's just call this Filr web disk 2. Disk 1 of course is the boot disk that we've got there, and then let me just add the second disk. This is going to be the log file disk. So here, create a new disk, and let's just leave that at 20, and click next, and then this is going to be Filr web disk 3, and let's click finish. So having got that set up, what we can now do is safely boot this machine for the first time. So I'll just click on power on there. While we're waiting for that to come up, let me just explain to you a bit of the process that we're going to go through now. So having set that up, we now need to go and assign things like an IP address, the host name to this server. We need to specify network settings, where our DNS server is, default route out, and indeed we need to specify those 2 disks that we just added to the system. So this may take a minute or so to come up for the first time, and the first thing that we get prompted with is going to be the license agreement, which I'm sure that you will read through carefully. However, on that screen there is one important thing that we need to change, and that is the default keyboard language that we're using, keyboard layout. If we get that keyboard layout wrong and we're typing passwords in, that can cause problems, because certainly in the past I've had problems using French or German keyboards and having them configured as UK, and passwords, if you're using any of the characters that have moved key from one key to another, can cause issues. So do make sure that you get that one right. And hopefully this will be up in a moment. You also, by the way, on that screen do have a license language that you can change if you want to see it in different language. But this is the important one, just to get the keyboard right. I'm actually running a UK keyboard, so I'll select that and click accept. So here we're being prompted for some passwords. This is the 2 sets of passwords here, the root password and the virtual appliance administrative password. Typically I set these passwords to be the same, though if you're going to separate out these roles to different people, you may want to make them different. But let me just type in, oops. So then we can put in your NTP server that you use. In this case I'll just leave it at the default, and let's change the region. I'm in Europe and I am in the United Kingdom. So then just click next. We get prompted for the host name. In this case the host name is going to be filrweb.demo.live, and then click next, and then the IP address. So here I'm just going to put in 172.31.1.1, the subnet dot yeah, no, .0.0, so that should be fine. Gateway is fine. Actually, that address is wrong. That's going to be 31.1.251. I can add additional DNS servers if I want, and additional domain searches, and then just click next. So the next thing we're going to be asked is where our data disk is, and we can select the disk that we set up previously. We do have the capability of setting what the file system type is. By default it's ext3, though you do have the option to format it with some other types as well, such as XFS, BTRFS, and indeed ext4. In this case, I'm just going to leave it at the SDB, which is the second disk, and you can see it's the right one because it's the 200 gig one. Then click next, and we then get asked for where our log files are going to be, and we'll leave that on the SDC one and just click next. What we're being prompted for now is we only see this on the Filr web appliance. We won't see it on other appliances if you end up installing those, but it's asking us where our shared area is for cluster install. And in a cluster install you can use NFS share or CIFS share, but in this instance we're just installing this on a single server. So in this case I'm just going to say no remote storage and then click next. So now this will go ahead and set up the machine for us, and we can then go in and configure that properly on the 9443 port, which is the virtual appliance administration port, to work as a Filr web appliance. So while we're waiting for that to come up, let me just tell you a little bit about some of the administrative options that we've got within the Filr environment. So something you may want to do once you've got Filr up and running is configure some additional administrators. So if you're an administrator of the system, it's a bit frustrating, especially initially when you're trying to go in and have to keep logging out, log in as admin to make a change, then log back in as you. You can just specify that you're an administrator, and then you'll get the administration console option appear within your Filr interface. And being an administrator gives you most options for doing administration. There are one or two that you don't actually have there, and you have to be in as the admin user, but in general that gives you those options. There's some other things just to be aware of in there. We do have the capability of not just having users that are in E directory and importing those into the system. If you want, you can have local users that are within the Filr system itself that don't actually exist in your E directory environment. So for instance, if you've got a contractor coming in, you want to give them some space and storage for sharing files with people, but you don't want to add them to your OES E directory environment. You can have them add them straight to the Filr system, give them a bit of storage on the Filr appliance, and they can use that and share files from that with whoever they need to. So you're not limited to just having OES users. And indeed, while we're talking about that, you can have a mixed environment. You can have OES users and a Windows environment here as well if you wanted to. So some users run against OES, some users run against Windows environment. They're all in the same Filr environment that we've got here. There's some other things most probably you need to be aware of. We do have an extensive reporting capability within Filr, And most probably the main report there that people are interested in is the step-by-step audit. So it will log every view, every modify, every share, every delete of a share, and so on, that you can run through. And so it does give you a full listing of what's gone on. Anyway, once that's come up, what we need to do now is go and configure the Filr system. So bring up a browser, and on the search page here just type in https : and then in my case it's the host name is Filr web.demo.live, and we need to do :9443, which is the port that the administration console is listening on. Hit return. And the first thing we're going to get here is a security warning. The reason we've got this is that we ship with self-minted certificates, and we haven't actually imported a valid certificate in here yet, which we'll do in a moment. But just bypass the security warning. So I'll just click on Advanced there and accept the risk. We then get prompted to authenticate. So the user you typically want to use to authenticate into the virtual appliance is VA admin. So VA admin, and then the password will be whatever you set during that boot sequence earlier. And then just click on sign in. So there's some options here that we've got. We can do we'll come on to digital certificates later when we import certificates. If you're going to expand the disk, you do it in the hypervisor using those tools, then come in here to expand the partition. System services doesn't do that much. Most probably the main thing in here is the ability to enable SSH to run, and you can set that up to come up automatically should you wish. You've just got the options here to start it or set it as automatic. But the main thing on this page is the ability to access those log files for different components of Filr. So Filr, Novell Filr is going to be the Tomcat instance. Jetty is the administration console we're in here. Postfix is the mail side if you're running that. FAMPT is File Access Middle Tier, I think it stands for, which is the capability that it's got to go against different file systems. So that will be what connects in your instance to the OES server. And we've got the database. In this case it's Postgres that we're running, that we store information in. In a bigger system you can run against MySQL, Maria, MS SQL, for instance, if you've got those already in place. We've got a firewall. We can change passwords, we can apply field patches if support give them to us, and here we've got the online update that we'll be coming on to later on to apply some patches. We can update the some of the underlying OS side as well. And then we've got some monitoring tools with Ganglia at the end. But what we want to do initially is just go into the configuration options here. So it's going to prompt us, are we doing a small deployment or large? In this instance we're doing a small deployment, so just click next. It's going to prompt us for a password for the Filr user in the database, so just set that up. And don't forget this password, because sometimes you do need to have this password. And then just click next. What default locale? I'm going to be United Kingdom. And then you're going to be prompted for the administrator user ID. You can change this if you want to something different. The only thing is that the default password for that user is the same name as that user. So if I was to set that to be Bob, for instance, the password would be Bob. So just be aware of that. That's the initial password. We obviously get prompted to change that on first login. Having done that, we'll just click on Finish. This will take a while to do. While it's doing that, let's just go through and on a page here, and let's just go and set up the online update which will pull down patches. By default, the appliance that we've just imported is, as you can see in the top right, a 4.0 appliance. Current version, as I'm making this video, is 4.1, and indeed 4.2 is due to be released in a month or two. So we need to get it up to the latest version that we've got. So to do that, just click on Online Update, and we've got the Micro Focus Customer Center we can go against, which most of you will be doing. We do have the capability to go against a local SMT server, should you wish, if you're using SMT and you pull down the patches centrally and then distribute them from there. What we then need to do is just type in the email address. So in this instance, I'll put in my email. And then I need to put in my activation key. So this is a key that I've got either as part of my evaluation, if you're putting in the evaluation, or from the customer center. In this case, I'll blur it out so you can't actually see my number, but that goes in there. And then we just need to click on register. We're not actually going to apply the patches quite yet. We'll do that in a moment once the configuration, that initial configuration that we were doing, has completed. And there's some extra things that we need to do in there as well. So let's just switch back to the other tab here, and that has actually finished coming up. So let's just go through some of these options that we've got. On the network side, make sure that the port redirection and the force secure connection are enabled. By default, under the scenes, the Tomcat instance that's running Filr is listening on port 8443. But users forget what number to put in after the URL, so it's easier if we just have it listening on standard HTTP and indeed HTTPS ports. So in this instance, they can just type in Filr web. It will hit it on port 80. That will get redirected to the 8443 port for us. Net folders, we need to ensure that is enabled to allow synchronization. Database should be fine. Search appliance, we don't need to do anything on. Possibly the reverse proxy settings here you'll need to change if the host name of this server is not the same name that your users are going to hit it on. If they're going to log into this server with a different URL, then you most probably want to change it. So it might be filr.demo.live, for instance, or filr.mycompany.com. So that address is what's in the email link on the URL to a shared document there. So make sure that's right, otherwise you're sharing emails, they click on it and they won't be able to find this server. Next important thing here is the outbound email. So typically you can use a local postfix server to send emails, and we send emails for a number of things like notifications of changes to files or folders, notifications of shares, of people accessing shares, and indeed people receiving share notifications of something that's been shared with them. And there are a few other things that we send that out for as well. We can use a local postfix server, though typically I tend to not use that, because obviously you've got to set up appropriate holes in the firewall for that to get out. I prefer to bounce off an existing SMTP relay, then it will go through your existing SMTP methods of sending to the outside world. So more often than not, I will disable that. I will change that to be the mail host, which in my case is going to be OES mail.demo.live. My time zone is fine. Username. I've got two options with this the relay that I'm trying to bounce off. I can either open up the relay from this address, address of this Filr web appliance, and allow it to relay, because typically relaying will be disabled, or I can authenticate as a user. So if I'm authenticating as a user, obviously I have to have that user available there and configure a password. So I've got the option for a password, and then I can just say that authentication is required. In this instance, I've opened up the relay, so that should be fine. Let's just test that. Hopefully that will come back valid. There we go, connection valid. So just say OK on that one. Let's just drop in there. If you change the memory on this appliance in the future, do make sure you come in here and change the Jvm memory as well. Typically I set this to be between 50 and 75% of the total memory. So you can see here with 16 gig it's been set by default at 9 gig, but if we were to up that to 24 gig for instance in the future, then this would still be set at 9 gig and you wouldn't really get any benefit of that as the memory is concerned. Last thing we need to do down here is import your license. So you'll have got this license either from your customer portal or as part of your evaluation. So here just click on the license and let's just browse for it, and I've got my license there, and just click OK. What we now need to do is do a reconfigure of the Filr server. This is going to take a while to implement, so while it's doing that, let's just go back to where we were before. I'm not going to apply those patches, but you can see here it's picked up all the patches that need to be applied. We'll apply those in a moment, but while we're waiting for that reconfigure to take place, what we'll do is just pop into the digital certificates here and set up our digital certificates. So we've got two key stores. One is the Jvm certificate and the other is the web application certificate. So just on the drop down you can take web application certificates, and there's that self-signed cert that we had initially set up. So we just want to import our certificate. So I've got one already that I've configured for a key pair, and let's just browse for that one, which is on where is it, files, and it's that certificate there. Let's just type in the password. So this is one I've got already, a wildcard certificate, but there is a way that you can create a key pair on here and issue a CSR from here should you need to, there'll be a video you can look on how to do that. So here I'll just import that. You can see that's imported okay, but it's just telling me to reboot the server. So here I'm just going to make that as active. So at the moment it's still using the old self-signed certificate, even though I've imported that one. So let me just set that as active, and then the other thing I need to do is just import any intermediary certificates that are there. So in this case I'm just going to import that DigiCert certificate there as well. So when you got your certificate, your certificate authority may have included some intermediary certificates with that you can just import at that point. So here I'm just going to say close, and let's just pop back here, and we can see that that has finished coming up. quite happily. And what we can do is just check that that's running. I can just click on there. Again, I'll get that self-minted certificate warning. Remember, we haven't rebooted and set up that new certificate yet, but that will go later on. If I click on advanced, and let's just accept the risk and continue, I should hopefully get the option to log in here. So just to be aware that sometimes this may take a while to come up, and indeed I may get a page not found or server not found at this point. The Tomcat instance behind Filr can take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to come up sometimes, so if it doesn't initially come up, just wait a moment and try again, and hopefully you'll have that there. If it doesn't come up, then one thing just to try quickly is just on the 8443 port. You can see it's done that automatically when I took that link, because that's the default port it listens on. It maybe the redirection isn't working. So anyway, here I just need to log in as that admin user that we specified as part of the configuration, and as I said, the default password is going to be the same as that one, so I'm just going to type in admin and go in. The first thing we're going to be prompted for here is to change our password, so I'm just going to put in the old password and type in a new password there and say OK, and there we go. We've got a Filr system up and running. Next prompt here that is that warning me about product improvement, telemetry. So this is a process we have in the product that it sends anonymous data. There's no way to trace it to you, no IP address or that sort of thing, of how you're using Filr. So how many folders you're exposing, how many files, are you going against OES or Windows. So we know how people are using Filr, and consequently we can go and do things like our test protocols around how people are running Filr in their environments, or rather than how we think they are. So it would be nice if you left that enabled. You can turn it off should you wish to. So that looks as if that's going fine there. So let's just go home. You can see here that I've got a big red exclamation mark against the online update because there's some patches that need to be applied. So let's just go and apply those. I'll click that there, and I don't need to worry about what order these are going to be applied in, and I have to apply them all. I can't just go up to a previous version. I've got to get up to the current version. So in this case I'm just going to update now, and then we get prompted that we may have some interruption. I'll just say OK to that, and away we go. That's going to take a while to apply those patches, so while it's doing that, let me talk a little bit more to you about some of the bits and pieces behind the scenes with Filr as far as the administration side. Something that's quite nice is the ability to see registered clients. So within the administration console we can see who's been logging in with a mobile device, for instance, or a desktop device, and indeed when they last logged in with that device. And we can also, what's quite nice there is we've got the ability to initiate a wipe of that device, and that's not a whole wipe of the whole system. That's just going to wipe the Filr information, so any downloaded files that they've got, any authentication credentials, any server information, that gets removed, and it's more or less like as if the application had just been installed, so unconfigured at the end there. So if somebody does lose a device, you can initiate a wipe on that should you wish, which is quite nice. Something else that you may want to look into is the Iq Advanced Authentication. Again, these are options that you've got on the administration console. With if you're running Filr Advanced, with the Filr Advanced license, you do have an entitlement to multi-factor authentication with Advanced Authentication Lite or Limited. That will allow you to use 4 methods of authentication, I think it is, or 5 methods. The main ones there are SMS one-time password, email one-time password, and time-based one-time password. So as someone tries to authenticate to Filr, you can send a SMS to their phone with a 4-digit number in that they have to type in order to finish that authentication to Filr. And as I said, that's an entitlement with Filr Advanced, so no additional cost as far as the software is concerned there. Obviously, if you're sending things like SMSs, there may be cost involved in that there. And you can go for, if you want to have more advanced methods of authentication like smart card, or use things like geofencing where you can check somebody's within a building, for instance, when they log in and so on. We do obviously have the full product for that you can purchase. Something else you most probably want to look at within the administration console, especially for the web interface, is the branding capabilities. So you can put your own logos when you hit the web page, and set some options up there for a bit of the look and feel of the product. If you're running Filr Advanced, then you do have the options to do similar capabilities for the desktop client and the mobile client. So you can put your logo on the mobile client, so when they try logging in, you've got your logo across the top of the login page, so it looks as if it's more part of the corporate infrastructure than it might otherwise do so, which is quite nice. And with some of those you can do things like set the corporate colors and as the color scheme, and so on. Other things that we've got available to us here are the ability to change the look and feel of the emails that get sent out. This can be done with either standard or the advanced version, but you may want to change the text on the emails. You may want to put your corporate logo on the emails as they're sent out. So we do have that capability as well if you wanted to do that sort of thing. With some of the platform options, the client platform options, we can set options on a global level. So something like the mobile interface we can disable for everyone and then just enable it for individuals who are going to be using it. So giving yourself a little bit more security there, that unknown people can't come in with a mobile app if they had that capability. But what I tend to do with that is you do have the option to set that up against a group. So I'll have a group in eDirectory called Filr Mobile Users, and anyone you want to be able to use the mobile interface to, you just add them to that group, so that when it next syncs in Filr, they'll be added to that group and they'll be able to use the mobile interface. And similarly with some of the desktop options and web options there. So you might disable the web interface for some users, or disable downloads for some users, and then or for everyone, and then just enable it for some people. So you've got quite a bit of flexibility there and granularity in setting up the rights for users. So some of the other things we've got available to us here are the ability I mentioned to run reports. So we've got lots of different reports available to us. I mentioned the auditing report earlier, but we do have reports on many other things like email reports, the login, who's been logging in, reports. We can see who's got access to particular areas, that sort of thing there. But something you may consider doing within your environment is that depending on your industry, you may have it mandated that you need to keep things like audit reports for a year, let's say. By default, everything is kept for 6 months, or if you go and look at the setting, it actually says 183 days, which seems somewhat arbitrary until you realize that's actually half a year. But obviously you may want to up that to 365 if you have to keep stuff for a year, or more if you've got an industry mandate that you have to keep it for longer. So just be aware that you may want to go and set that up there. Other things you may want to do once this is completed is set up the Office and Outlook settings. You've only got the Outlook capability if you're running Advanced Filer, but what that does is it allows you to take a file that's in Filer and just send a pointer to it, to the recipients, and then they obviously don't have to receive a 20 meg, 30 meg file. If it's a big PowerPoint, for instance, they just get a pointer, they can click on it and access the file, so you're not going to get messages bounced from there. It's also useful with things like single message store type functionality, so rather than having a copy of that large file with multiple people, they only have a pointer to a single version of it there. You do have the Office add-in as well that allows you to share and access files straight from Word or Excel or PowerPoint, and that is available on the standard, not just the advanced version of Filer. Anyway, you can see here that those updates have finished. If I have a look there, I can see that hopefully if I go to the installed patches, we'll see the patches that are installed, which is fine. If I close that, you'll notice up in the top right now it says I'm at version 4.1.2 rather than the 4.0, and I've got this flashing reboot needed. So let's just click on the reboot, say OK, and we have reboot in progress. So again, this is going to take a few minutes to come up there, so I'll talk a little bit more about some of the features that we've got. But while we're doing that, let me just bring up the console and we can see what's happening and see how that's going. So something, the Office plugin you'll need to download and install, and you can do that from the web interface should you need to as a user, and obviously as an administrator you can distribute it in whatever way you wish. But that will add a bit of extra functionality on the I get an extra menu option for Filer, and when I once I've logged into Filer, and I can of course cache my credentials if I wanted to at that point, I've got options to save or open files from Filer, and I also have options to save a file. I have options to share a file with other users straight from within Word or Excel, so it makes my life a little bit easier to go through that sort of thing. Something else that you may be interested in installing is with the Advanced Edition you do get the content editor, so that would be another virtual appliance that you'd need to install, and there's a separate video going through that and how to configure it. But that lets you do online editing of files and indeed concurrent editing, so you can have multiple users at the same time editing the same file. And it does give you some DLP options, like don't allow copying of data outside the document, don't allow people to print the document, that sort of thing, if you wish. Anyway, the servers come up there, but our Tomcat instance won't be up. Just a little hint there: if you log in here as root and use your password that you specified earlier, we can do a tail F on the Tomcat log file. So let me just do tail F, and the file I want to do this on is opt novel filer Apache Tomcat logs, and then it's called catalina.out, and we can see that coming up, because again, as a lot of people, once they get to the login prompt there, think it's come up and will try logging in, and they will fail. It will come up with a page not found or server not found, or indeed, depending what point you hit it, it may come up with a Java error. So just hold back for another minute or so, a couple of minutes, and then try logging in again, and you'll find that you'll be able to log in. And while we're talking about that, the first time you log in, and indeed the first time you go to certain pages, there may be a little bit of a delay because it's got to cache that information. So don't be surprised if it's a little bit sluggish initially after booting. So we can see that coming up, and there's a line in here we're looking for that will tell us that it's finished coming up, which I'll show you in a moment once that's there. And there we are. You can see it's this line at the bottom there, server startup in 204,000 seconds. So what's that? That's 3 minutes or so that took to come up in this instance. Mind you, I'm running on a laptop here with some other servers running, my OES server and mail server and stuff running, so it may well be faster coming up in your environment. So having done that, let's switch over to a browser. And here you can see now it's at 4.12 rather than the 4.0, and I'm just going to log in as admin, and then that password that we've reset the password to, and that will let us come in here. By the way, I'm just showing you the old interface here. There is a more modern interface, and in 4.2 that's going to be the only interface, the new interface there. If I remember at the end, I'll show that to you. So here, to get to the administration console, I just click on my name in the top right, click on administration console, and here what I want to do initially is just bring in my users. So let's click on LDAP. I've got a list of options here for adding a new LDAP server, and I can have multiple LDAP servers going against multiple eDirectory trees, or eDirectory and Windows, for instance. But in this case, I'm just going to type in LDAP : / and then the server address, which in my case is eder.demo.live, and then the port number. I'm going on insecure LDAP here, so that's 389. You can go on secure LDAP should you wish to. Then we'll put in the user DN. So here I've got a user called Filr Proxy, and that's in system, and this is a user that's got rights to the tree to read users and so on, and indeed I use this same user as a proxy for the file system, so it's got file system rights as well, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. I'll just put in my password, Leave directory type at eDirectory and GUID, attributes and file account name attribute. Then just click on users, and so we need to specify where our users are coming from. I'm just going to click on add, and when I can just type in the base DN there, but I tend to click on the browse because this is the first time we know if the settings we put on the previous page are correct. So is the server name correct, is the user right, and is the password correct? In this case it is, because I can see my tree, so let's just select that container. I then have a filter here. I can change this filter so that for instance only members of a particular group are imported. So I may have 10,000 users in my environment but only have licenses for 5,000 of them, so I can limit who has access that way. If you want to find the filter for that, just look in the admin guide, you'll find it there. I'm just going to select search subtree, and then I've got options for where is it going to find the user's home directory information from. I've got various options here, though more often than not it will be just the home directory attribute in eDirectory, and that should be populated. If you haven't got it populated, you can use the other methods to populate it there. Then I'll just click OK, and then click on groups to bring in groups. So here again I'm just going to select that container, search subtree, and again I can change the filter to only bring in certain groups should I wish to. But as far as groups are concerned, the important thing here normally is that you want to bring in all groups that you're using for access control on the file system. If there's a group that you've used to assign access control to a directory on the file system and we don't have that group, then we don't know which users can see that directory, and consequently they won't see it. So more often than not, you want to bring in all your groups into the filer environment because you don't know which of them have been used to assign file rights. Click OK on that. Then let's just go through some of these settings here. So on user settings, I've got the option to disable account when it's been deleted from LDAP, though typically I tend to delete it. I'll get a warning here just letting me know about that, but I tend to delete it because I don't want to have those old users in the system, and I'll also say delete the associated user workspaces and content, but you can set it to what you want should you wish to. Then set the time zone. In my case it's going to be GMT London, and the locale for you. Then just go to groups, and again here I typically set this to delete groups that have been deleted from LDAP, so we're matching what's in the LDAP environment. Next we've got the sync timings. So do I want to periodically rerun this LDAP sync to pick up any changes, which normally you do. So just check on enable, and then specify how long when you want this to happen. So normally you may want this to happen once a day, and you can just set the time you want it to go off, or you can say do it multiple times during the day. So in this case I'll say do it every 6 hours, and we can do that there. And finally on the end is that option that I mentioned before. We can have local users on Filr that aren't in eDirectory. So here if you're going to have those sorts of accounts, you can just say allow login for accounts that aren't in LDAP. So click on OK, and that will save that. What we now need to do is actually just go through and synchronize that. So I can just come into LDAP servers, do sync all, and hopefully we'll see those users come across. So you can see we've got some users coming in there, and I've brought in some groups as well for that. So that's fine. So we now have users in the system. What we also has happened as part of that import, and you may get a warning here about it is if I go and look at this option here, net folder servers, you'll see that it's created a server for me automatically. It's created that based on the fact that I've imported users and they have a home directory which is on this server. So in this instance I need to configure that, but let's not go in there quite yet. What I tend to do first is set up something called a proxy identity. So this is a user that I can use time and time again when setting up NetFolder servers. So rather than putting in a user ID and password time and time again, if I've got multiple servers, I can just set up that information once and then keep using that. The main thing here is that if something like the password on that user changes, I don't have to do it to 100 servers. If I'm exposing 100 servers, I just do it once here, and that will affect all the servers. So here I'm just going to do a new proxy identity. I'll call that OES proxy. Proxy name, let's just go and select file a proxy, and password. So this is a user, as I said earlier, that has full rights to the file system, and it's this user that's going to be used if somebody is trying to access a file they don't have rights to. So if I share a file with a colleague from my home drive, they obviously don't have rights there, but when I share it with them, they try and access it, it will be this user on the back end that goes to get that file for them. And indeed, obviously, for an external user who the back end eDirectory doesn't even know about, it will be this user that accesses the file on their behalf. So that's set up. What I next need to do is just go to the NetFolder server. If we click on that, I need to change the server type. Is going to be Open Enterprise Server, and on the authentication side I just need to specify that OES proxy. I could specify username and password, but in this case I'm just using a proxy. Then I'll just test that, and that should come back it's succeeded, which is good. Then go on the sync timings, and you can see here that's enabled every day at midnight. So it may be that depending on how long the synchronization takes, that I want to set that a little bit earlier. So maybe in this instance I'll set it to go off at 6 o'clock in the evening. You most probably want this to be timed to be outside business hours, so it's not going to impact your users when it does the sync. And when we're talking about sync here, it's not moving data at all, it's just getting metadata about files, and indeed if there are any new files that have been added to the system. So don't worry about it actually moving files here. And then we've got the sync options. So at the top of the list here I've got index the files. So things like file name are indexed, so I can search on file name. But what this does is let me do a full index, have a full index of the content of files. So I can search on any file that mentions microfocus. So that might be a PDF file, it might be a Word document, might be a PowerPoint presentation. I can find any file that mentions that within the content of the file. Obviously there's an overhead on the indexer for doing that, and indeed on the size of the index. Normally these days I leave that disabled. Just-in-time sync you want to be enabled. What that does is as somebody navigates through the filer environment and goes into a new directory, it'll just do a quick directory listing to pick up any changes that have happened, that might have happened since the last synchronization. Let's just click OK, and I've got those that server set up. What we now need to do is just set up net folders, which are shared areas. So departmental shares, project shares, that sort of thing I need to set up. So let's just go through and set up a new net folder server. So here let's call this shares. This can be called anything, your users aren't going to see this, so it doesn't matter. I'm just going to change that to Open Enterprise Server.
So my servers // let's use the IP address 172.17.2.180/London. Go to the authentication. That's going to be OES proxy. Do test. There we go. Go to the sync schedule. We'll do the same as before. We'll enable the sync schedule. I'll do this every day at stagger it from the other one, so I'll say 7 o'clock. Something to bear in mind here is if the synchronization takes a long time to happen, then maybe something I want to do is just do this on a weekend day, so on Saturday for instance. So if it's going to take 20 hours to run because I've got so many files, then I can just do that on the Saturday for instance, so it's not going to impact on users' performance during working hours. Finally, on the sync options down the end here, again I'm not going to index the content, but I do want to have JITs enabled on that just so that they can do that quick one-time look at a directory as they move into it. Click OK. What we now need to do is set up our net folders. So the net folders are going to be the top level shared folders that we're exposing. So in this case I'll just click on net folders, do add, and let's call this one sales. Now this name here is something that the users are going to see, so make it something that makes sense to them. I'm just going to put that on that shares folder, and the relative path here is going to be /file/sales, and I can just do test connection. That's okay. We'll use the setting on the net folder server. We'll use the JITs that we've got defined. Now the rights, this is who's got rights to access this area. So I typically tend to use or a group that's automatically created called all internal users. So I'll say they can access this folder, and you may think, why do that? You know, if I've got a finance folder, why do allow access for all users? What we're doing here is saying that we're leaving whether they can see the folder or not to the file system, to the in this case the NSS file system. So if I do not have rights on the file system to see this file, I am not going to see it here, and I won't even know the directory exists if I don't have rights. And so often I see multiple entries here of people trying to replicate their file system rights as to whether they've got rights or not. You don't really need to do that. The only time you need to have multiple entries in here is if you've got users who've got different sharing rights. So if some people can share internally, some people can share externally, and so on. That's the only thing you need to worry about here. So here on sales we'll say that they can share internally. I'll just say OK to that. On the sync schedule we can say override the sync schedule that we had before, but in this case I'll just say use the same as on the net folder server. And finally on data sync, are we going to let the information in this folder be accessible from the desktop client? And in this case we'll say yes. So I'll say OK, and then I get prompted to sync the folder now, so I'll say OK to that. So just while we're here, see the spinning circle there? If I click on that, I can see in real time this update with information about how the sync is going. About every 10 seconds or so it will give an update. But most probably the important thing here is that bit at the top that tells me how long the synchronization has taken, and that can then govern when I kick off that daily sync or at the weekend, should I wish to. So let's just add in a couple more here. So I'll add in marketing, and that's on that other share folder relative path is going to be files marketing. Do a test. There we go. Go to rights. Do all internal users, and I'll allow that. And let's say everyone can share externally from this one as well. Sync schedule is going to be the same as on the NetFolder server, and I'll let them access that from the desktop. Finally, let's just add in, by the way, I don't have to wait for that sync to stop when I'm setting things up. Let's just do finance here and change that share. It's going to be files finance. Test that I've got it right. Yep. Go to rights, and here we'll say all internal users, and they can access it. So let's just go to the sync schedule. We'll use the one we've defined already, but this time I'm not going to let the folder be accessed from the user's desktop. I don't, it's a high value folder with confidential information. I don't want people taking that offline, so we'll just hide it from the desktop. If I click OK on that, and we'll sync that now. So that's set up the net folders. What we now need to do is just set up the opportunity for users to share. So if you move down and look in the left hand menu there, we've got this option for share and comment settings. So in here I can specify a master share setting for my users, and it's this one that takes preference. So if I'm not allowed to share in these settings and I've been given share options on a net folder, I will not be able to share because it's this one which is the master setting. If I've got a setting here to enable me to share internally and externally, and on a net folder I'm only set to be able to share it internally, then I will only be able to share those files internally. So effectively this is a maximum level of share that I can go up to here, but then the net folder share settings come in below that, so I will take whatever's on the net folder share up to this level. So in this case, let's say all internal users can share internally, and let's say that Adele and can share externally if I wanted to, and internally at that point. Let's just add me to that as well. So Redgrave can share with internal and external. So there we go. So that's set up the share options there. So now what we need to do is just test that. So let me just log out here as the administrator. I'll just sign out, and we'll log in as, let's log in as me, Redgrave, type in my password, and hopefully we'll see my home drive. And there we go. First time it's obviously reading it in from the directory. And let's see my net folders. So I can see all the net folders there, and if I just go into something like marketing, you can see here I've got the option to share the file, and you can see there with the envelope I've got the option to share it externally should I wish to. So that's up and running. Oh, I did want to just show you the new UI briefly. You can use this if you want. As I said, with 4.1 this is an option. In 4.2 you're only going to be able to use this new UI, and in 4.1 it's a tech preview, so it's not fully featured, just so you're aware. So let me just log in there and go to my files, so you can see all the files that I've got access to there. If I wanted to share this, I can come in and click on that and share this with a user. So if I want to, I can
right mouse click, and I've got options there to on the drop down, and it's a lot cleaner, more responsive interface than the other interface that we were looking at. So you've got the option to use that should you wish in 4.1. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this video useful.